What is the purpose of education? In this talk, I'll be looking at various aspects of education, my experiences and perspectives. Now, I have to say, in my lifetime, views about the purpose of education have changed greatly. Increasingly, society, represented not just by politicians and society leaders, but even by parents and children themselves, see the purpose of education increasingly as utilitarian, and in my view, rather narrowly focused and suboptimal. Obviously, intended to give pupils and students the skills like reading and mathematics that they need in order to survive, and also whatever knowledge they need in order to get good jobs and at the end of their education. But that's not the case everywhere. The other purpose of education, socialization, the passing on of values, etc., are still recognised, but seem to be played down and undervalued. But I was in Yemen not so long ago, before that country sort of suffered the tragedy that it's suffering from now. And in a conference on higher education within the country, somebody senior passionately said that the purpose of education was not merely to pass on knowledge and skills, but to pass on moral attitudes and values. And indeed, Lord Robbins in England, who produced a seminal report on higher education 60 years ago, described one of the four purposes of higher education, in addition to passing on skills and so on, was to pass on a common values of citizenship, common culture and common values of citizenship. Those were his words. My wife, who is, or who rather was until she retired, a teacher, says that she saw through the life of her professional career a devaluing to the point where it almost was extinguished the artistic and sensitization of young people as a purpose of education, and the growing dominance of basic skills to the exclusion of everything else. An interesting question is how important formal education is as opposed to informal education. I know parents who have taken their children out of formal education, not just for homeschooling, indeed not at all in some cases for homeschooling, but to take them around the world on a trip. So these children were out of school for 2 years or more. But actually, in the medium to long term, it seems to have made no apparent difference to their lives. Some went on to university and some went on to good jobs and lived fulfilled lives. They developed all the skills they would have done, and perhaps more, from the informal education that they received while travelling. So they did, as I say, go to university, get the skills they needed and the jobs they would otherwise have got. And a related question that arises in my mind is the age at which children should begin their school. In a country like Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, children don't begin school until they're 7 years old. Whereas in a country like England, and England is more typical, I think, it's at 4 or 5, and in other countries as young as 3. If you look at the results, nobody can say that Finnish society suffers from having less formal schooling than, say, English society. That's not to say that children in Finland don't have some form of education, but it's not formal education, not formal school education, but nursery, where they experience socialization and artistic development rather than formal teaching of school subjects. Looking at universities in particular, which is the area where I've spent most of my career working, there's a particular question about what higher education, what university is for. Is it to prepare you for a particular profession, or does it have some other less clearly practical purpose? Of course, it remains the case that there are some programs that are necessary in order to practice a profession, medicine, for example, but others aren't. Should students just study those subjects because they like them, because they're interested? If the purpose of education is to train the mind and prepare young people for future learning and flexibility, then it shouldn't really matter what subjects they study. What's important is that they should be able to think logically and creatively, to be able to tell the difference between truth and falsehood and so on. I myself studied philosophy and ancient history at university. I've never regretted that. It prepared me well for my future work analysing and developing policy within government and in independent bodies. On the other hand, it has to be recognised that from the point of view of students, the point of university may be largely to help them to get a better job, because by and large the best jobs are filled by those who have been to university. And not going to university is generally a handicap in the job market. And in some countries, what you study at university determines what you can do in life. For example, in those countries I'm talking about, you can't be a banker unless you've studied banking at university. But in other countries, in the UK and the USA, for example, you can study pretty well anything at undergraduate level, and then if you want to specialise in order to go into a particular career, then you would do so at postgraduate level. In actual fact, there's been a development in Europe and now adopted in over 40 countries around the world, which is intended to increase generalisation at undergraduate level, shortening the undergraduate study, and to focus career-specific education at master's level. That's called the Bologna process, the Bologna system, following an agreement reached in Bologna among a small number of European higher education ministers. But the truth is that higher education is very conservative, and although formally adopted in more than 40 countries, making the change has been slow. The other thing to say, though, to those who focused on higher education as a means to increase your earning power, is that going to university is not just about earning more money. While it's true that research from the Congressional Budget Office in the USA reveals that every year of education leads to higher earnings on average, there's also evidence from other research that the higher the level of education, the better your health is likely to be, the fewer the social problems you're likely to have, the fewer marital and parental problems, the better your mental health, the more liberal your attitudes, and the lower your level of criminality. So that's one answer to those who say that universities are entirely about economic benefit. They do provide economic benefit to the individuals and therefore to society as well, but they also provide other benefits, less tangible ones but nevertheless real ones, for society as a whole.